The scream tore through the mansion like glass shattering. "Get her off me. Please, she's biting me." Grant Whitmore was halfway down the grand staircase before the echo even died. His shoes thundered against the marble as he rounded the corner into the playroom, a room filled with untouched toys and heavy silence. There, in the center of the chaos, his daughter Nora clung to the maid's arm, her tiny teeth sunk deep into flesh, her little body trembling with rage. Blood welled under her bite. "Nora!" Grant's voice hit the air like thunder. The child froze. Her big blue eyes darted to him. Then she released the maid and bolted, curls flying as her small feet pattered against the floor, up the stairs, and into her room. The maid stumbled back, clutching her arm. I can't do this anymore, Mr. Whitmore. She's not right." Grant's jaw tightened. "She's 4 years old," he said, his voice low. "And she's lost her mother." But the woman had already snatched her purse and fled, tears streaming down her face. The front doors slammed behind her. And then, silence. Grant stood in the middle of his vast, perfect house, a blood-stained napkin in one hand, the other pressed against his temple. He looked toward the family portrait above the fireplace, his late wife, Lila, smiling down, cradling a newborn Nora. That picture had been taken the day before the crash. Now, 2 years later, the woman in the photograph was gone, and the child left behind bit anyone who tried to love her. Grant sank into a leather chair, staring at the storm outside the tall glass windows overlooking Lake Travis. Lightning flashed across the water, painting the house in white for a moment before plunging it back into shadow. "Lila," he whispered to the empty room. "I don't know how to fix her. If you were Grant, grieving, broken, and trying to raise a child who pushes everyone away, would you keep fighting for her, or finally give up? Tell me in the comments." Across the city, in a small downtown diner smelling faintly of coffee and rain, Danielle Hayes sat at the counter with her resume folded beneath her hand. The storm outside had darkened the windows, thunder rolling across the Austin skyline. "You really think you want to work for that man?" her friend Tasha Miller asked, shaking her head. "The Whitmore girl's famous. Bit every maid, every nanny. They say she won't even speak." Danielle smiled faintly. "Kids act out when they're hurting." Tasha sighed. "This one bites. Hurting or not, that ain't normal." "Neither is losing your mother at 2, Danielle said softly. Tasha's face softened. "You sure you can handle that, Danny? You've been through enough already." Danielle looked down at her hands, steady but scarred from old grief. 2 years ago, she'd lost her little sister in an accident she couldn't stop replaying. Some nights, she still woke up hearing the screech of tires. "I need to do this," she said quietly. "Maybe helping someone else heal is how I start healing, too." She unfolded the paper again. Position, live-in nanny, Whitmore Estate, Lake Travis, immediate start. Tasha groaned. "Girl, that place looks like a museum. I saw it once, pure money and misery." Danielle smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time somebody brought a little life back into it." The next morning, the Whitmore mansion gleamed beneath the rising Texas sun. The grounds were flawless, perfect hedges, marble fountain, not a single toy in sight. When the black SUV stopped at the front gate, Grant stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching. His assistant had convinced him to try one last time. "She's got a background in child trauma care," the man had said. "If anyone can reach Nora, it's her." Grant didn't believe in anyone anymore, but he couldn't stop trying. He turned as the front doors opened. The woman who stepped in wasn't what he expected. Danielle Hayes carried calm the way others carried perfume, subtle but undeniable. Her posture was gentle, her voice sure. "Mr. Whitmore," she greeted him, shaking his hand. "Thank you for meeting me." "You've read the file?" he asked. "Yes." "And you still came?" Her lips curved slightly. "She's a child, not a headline." That response stopped him for a second. He led her upstairs to the nursery, where Nora sat on the rug, back to the door, hair tangled, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Nora," Grant said quietly. "This is Miss Hayes." The child didn't look up. Danielle knelt on the floor, a few feet away, keeping her tone soft but steady. "Hi, Nora. I like your rabbit. What's her name?" No answer. Danielle reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden bird toy, winding it until it chirped a soft tune. The little girl's head tilted slightly toward the sound. Grant exhaled quietly, ready for the usual outcome: a bite, a scream, or a retreat. But this time, Nora turned her face toward Danielle. And then, her lips curved. A smile. Faint, uncertain, but real. For a second, neither adult moved. Grant's throat tightened, disbelief flooding his chest. Danielle stayed perfectly still, meeting the child's eyes with gentle warmth. And just like that, the house that had known only echoes and grief for 2 years breathed again. The Texas morning bathed the playroom in gold. For once, the room wasn't silent. Nora sat cross-legged on the rug, sorting puzzle pieces with tiny, focused hands. Danielle sat opposite her, humming softly as she helped turn the edge pieces upright. "You're really good at this," she said lightly. Nora didn't reply, but her eyes flicked toward Danielle's face, a shy glance, not a glare. Upstairs, Grant stood just out of sight, leaning against the banister, watching through the open door. He had promised himself not to interfere, yet he couldn't look away. Nora hadn't sat still this long in months. Danielle's patience was unlike anything he'd seen before. She didn't crowd or coax. She waited, let silence breathe. When Nora dropped a piece, Danielle only smiled. "That's okay. Try again." The little girl hesitated, then fitted into place. Danielle clapped softly. "Perfect." Nora's shoulders relaxed. For the first time, Grant saw her calm. He swallowed hard, pressing a hand to the wall for balance. Something in his chest, a place he'd locked tight, shifted. That evening, Grant sat in his study, the security feed flickering softly on his desk. The playroom camera showed Danielle reading aloud while Nora traced pictures in a book. "You've been staring at that feed for an hour, sir," his assistant Tom Avery said. Grant didn't look away. She smiled again. Tom raised an eyebrow. "That's rare. She hasn't smiled for anyone in 2 years." Tom nodded slowly. "Maybe this woman's not like the others." Grant's lips tightened, but he didn't answer. He just kept watching as Danielle leaned over, brushed a curl from Nora's face, and laughed at something the child did with her crayons. It was the first sound of laughter in that house since Lila's funeral, and it didn't come from him. The next day, Danielle took Nora out into the garden overlooking Lake Travis. The sun glinted off the water below, and the wind carried the smell of honeysuckle. "Come on, Nora," she said, slipping off her shoes and stepping into the grass. "It's soft." "See." The girl hesitated at the edge, tiny toes curling against the stone path. "It's okay," Danielle whispered. "Just try." Slowly, Nora stepped forward. The grass bent under her feet, and she gasped, a soft, astonished sound. Then she smiled again. Grant watched from the terrace, coffee forgotten in his hand. His daughter's laughter floated up on the breeze, quiet, pure, impossible. And when Danielle looked up and caught him watching, she smiled. He froze, caught off guard. Then, before he could stop himself, he smiled back. That night, Danielle hummed softly as she tucked Nora into bed. The tune drifted through the hall, a lullaby, low and sweet. Outside the door, Grant stood listening. It was the same song Lila used to sing. He closed his eyes, his chest heavy with something that was equal parts grief and gratitude. When the melody faded, he whispered, barely audible, "Thank you." The next morning, Danielle found a folded note on the kitchen counter. "Miss Hayes, I've arranged for a new therapist to come next week. Also, Nora likes peaches. She hasn't had them in a while. Grant." Danielle smiled, tucking the note into her pocket. Small gestures could mean everything. And as the sunlight filled the kitchen, she realized this wasn't just a job anymore. Something fragile and beautiful was growing here, between her, the little girl, and the man still learning how to feel again. Have you ever met someone who healed a part of you without meaning to? Share your story below. Sometimes love begins with the smallest act of kindness. That night, Grant sat in his study, listening to the faint hum of laughter echoing down the hall. For once, the mansion didn't feel like a tomb. He didn't know what would come next. But he knew this. For the first time in years, he wasn't listening for silence. He was listening for them. The first time Grant avoided her eyes, Danielle felt it like a door quietly closing. For days after the accident in the garden, their rhythm had shifted, subtly, but unmistakably. He no longer lingered at breakfast. His footsteps didn't echo down the hallway at the same times. The mornings, once soft with laughter from Nora and the sound of coffee being poured, were now filled with silence that stretched like a wound. Danielle tried not to notice. She hummed while making Nora's oatmeal, told stories about clouds that looked like unicorns, but the air in the Whitmore estate carried something heavy, something unsaid. Nora, perceptive in the way only children could be, caught it too. "Daddy sat again," she whispered one night while Danielle tucked her in. Danielle paused, her hand resting on the blanket. "Why do you think that, sweetheart? He doesn't look at you anymore." The words were a whisper, but they burned through Danielle's chest. She kissed Nora's forehead, forcing a smile. "Daddy's just busy, baby. Grown-ups get lost in work sometimes." But the truth lingered like Texas humidity, thick and hard to breathe through. Downstairs, Grant was exactly where she knew he'd be. In his study, the dim lamplight cutting through the late evening dark. Piles of papers sat untouched before him. He wasn't working, just staring, the weight of something invisible pressing down. He hadn't meant to pull away. He'd told himself it was necessary, the right thing. Danielle had slipped too easily into the hollow his late wife once filled. The sound of her laughter at breakfast. The way she steadied his daughter's fears. The way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. That look scared him. It reminded him he was alive again, and that felt like betrayal. Still, when the housekeeper, Mrs. Greeley, passed him the next morning with a knowing glance, her voice low, he caught the tremor of judgment beneath her politeness. "Mr. Whitmore," she murmured, "word travels quick around houses this size. You might want to watch how much time Miss Hayes spends in your study." Grant froze. "She's my daughter's nanny," he said stiffly. Mrs. Greeley nodded, but her eyes said she didn't believe him. After that, everything between them changed again. When Danielle entered a room, he stood a little straighter, spoke a little colder. She felt it, like walking into a room that had suddenly lost its warmth. At lunch, she placed Nora's plate before her, and Grant said, "I'll take my meals in the office from now on." His tone was gentle but final. Danielle swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "Of course, sir." He hated that she called him sir. Before, she'd said his name like it meant something. Now, it was walls and titles all over again. Later that night, when thunder rolled over Lake Travis and lightning flashed against the windows, Nora cried out from her room. Danielle ran to her, wrapping her arms around the trembling girl. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, rocking her gently. "It's just thunder. It can't hurt you." A flash illuminated the hallway, and there, standing in the doorway, was Grant. Barefoot, tie undone, eyes tired. He hesitated before stepping closer. "I heard her crying," he said softly. Danielle nodded. "She's okay now." For a long moment, they just stood there, the sound of rain filling the silence. Nora's breathing slowed between them, her small body safe in Danielle's arms. Grant's gaze softened, something fragile flickering behind it. Then he caught himself, straightening. "You should get some rest too. It's late." "I'm fine. I insist." Their eyes met, and for the first time in weeks, the tension broke, not in anger, but in exhaustion. They were both so tired of pretending. Danielle looked down, her voice low. "Why are you pushing me away, Grant?" The use of his name stopped him cold. He exhaled slowly. "Because people talk. Because my daughter adores you. Because I can't afford to let her lose another woman she loves." Her eyes glistened, the truth of it cutting deeper than any accusation could. "You're not protecting her," she said softly. "You're protecting yourself." For a second, the storm outside felt like it had moved inside the room. Grant didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, he turned and walked out, each step echoing down the hallway until only rain remained. Danielle stayed beside Nora until she fell asleep, her heart twisting with something that felt too much like longing. When she finally returned to her small guest room, she stood by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. She whispered to no one, "You can't help who your heart decides to see." Outside, lightning cracked over the water. And the Whitmore house felt both too large and too small for all the feelings trapped within its walls. The morning after the storm, the world seemed washed raw. Branches lay broken across the long driveway, and the sky still wore bruises of gray. Power had flickered all night before finally giving out just before dawn. Danielle woke to the quiet hum of stillness. No coffee machine, no air conditioning, just the creak of wood settling. She found Nora sitting at the edge of her bed, clutching a damp stuffed bear. "Daddy's mad again?" Nora asked. Danielle brushed a curl from the little girl's cheek. "No, honey. Daddy's just thinking too much." She smiled to reassure her, but inside, She felt the tight pull of uncertainty. After last night, after the words she and Grant had exchanged, she wasn't sure where she stood. The sound of footsteps came from the hallway. Grant appeared in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, hair still damp from the rain. He looked older somehow, like the storm had stripped something off him too. "The road's blocked," he said. "Tree came down near the gate. We're stuck here until someone clears it." Danielle nodded slowly. "So, no power, no leaving, no distractions." His lips twitched, not quite a smile. Exactly. That day unfolded like a test neither of them had agreed to take. Mrs. Greeley couldn't make it in, so Danielle took to the kitchen, trying to light the old gas stove manually. Grant joined her after a few minutes, setting down a flashlight and rolling up his sleeves again. "I used to do this all the time," she said, crouching to strike the match. "When my grandmother's power went out, we cooked by candlelight." He watched the flame catch and flicker across her face. "You grew up in Houston, right?" She nodded. "Third Ward. My mom worked nights. I learned to take care of things early." Grant leaned against the counter, the faintest smile playing at his lips. "You'd have made one hell of an executive assistant." Danielle gave him a look. "That's your way of saying I'm bossy, isn't it?" His eyes softened. "Efficient. There's a difference." They both laughed, quietly, almost cautiously, like the sound itself might break the fragile truce between them. By noon, the house felt smaller. The storm clouds began to part, light filtering through broken windows in soft beams. Nora painted at the kitchen table, humming to herself while Grant fixed a loose cabinet hinge. For the first time in weeks, it almost felt normal. Almost. When Nora asked Danielle to read to her, she climbed into Danielle's lap without hesitation. Grant paused mid-task, watching them. The two people who made the mansion feel alive again. Danielle's voice was calm, low, carrying the rhythm of a story about bravery and kindness. Nora's eyelids drooped. Her head fell against Danielle's chest, and soon she was asleep. Grant set his tools down, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're good with her. Better than anyone since," he trailed off. Danielle didn't look up. Since her mother. The name they both avoided hung between them like a ghost. Grant nodded slowly, his throat tight. "She used to hum when she cooked. Same as you do." Danielle's breath caught, the intimacy of that detail cutting deeper than she expected. "I'm not trying to replace her," she said quietly. "I know." His voice broke. "That's what scares me." Silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but charged. Outside, the wind whispered through the oaks. Then, a sharp sound, a crash from upstairs. Nora startled awake and clung to Danielle. Grant rushed toward the staircase. "Stay here." Danielle followed anyway, heart pounding. Upstairs, a small piece of ceiling plaster had fallen in one of the guest rooms, rain having leaked through the old roof tiles. "It's just water damage," Grant said, relieved. "But we'll have to move some things." He tried lifting one of the heavy trunks, but his footing slipped on the wet floor. Before he could fall, Danielle grabbed his arm. Their hands met, and held. It wasn't just instinct. It was need. Neither moved. The moment stretched, pulsing with something they didn't dare name. Grant's breath came slower now, his voice low. "You should have let me fall." "I tried," she whispered back, eyes locked on his. "Didn't work." He let out a shaky laugh, and for a heartbeat, they stood too close, the storm outside replaced by the one between them. Then he pulled away, jaw tight. "I'll call someone to fix the roof once the lines are back." Danielle nodded, pretending her heart wasn't still racing. That night, the power was still out, so they ate by candlelight, all three of them. Nora told knock-knock jokes. Grant laughed harder than he had in months, and Danielle found herself studying his face in the glow. When Nora finally fell asleep again, Grant lingered by the doorway. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For staying." Danielle's voice caught. "You didn't give me much choice." "No," he admitted. "But I'm glad you didn't leave." As he turned to go, the candlelight flickered over his face, and for the first time, Danielle saw something break open in him. Not love yet, but the beginning of it. When the lights finally came back hours later, the house felt different. Not repaired, but alive. It was just past midnight when Danielle heard the piano. Soft at first, like hesitation turned into sound. A melody half remembered, half lost. She followed it down the dimly lit hallway, her bare feet soundless on the hardwood floor. The power had come back, but the house still felt caught between two worlds, half in darkness, half in light. The melody came from the parlor. Grant sat at the piano, his sleeves rolled up, his eyes unfocused as his fingers traced notes that trembled with memory. She hesitated at the door. He looked up. "Did I wake you?" Danielle shook her head. "I didn't know you played." He smiled faintly. "I don't. Not really. My wife used to. She taught me one song before." He stopped himself, swallowing the rest. Danielle stepped closer, drawn in by the quiet gravity of the room. "It's beautiful." It was her favorite. Used to fill the house. "Now I play it to remind myself she was real." His voice cracked, and for the first time, Danielle saw the full weight of his loneliness. Not the proud billionaire, but the man left standing in the echo of what he'd lost. "Grant," she said softly, sitting beside him on the bench. "You don't have to keep bleeding for her." He turned to her, eyes sharp with emotion. "If I stop hurting, doesn't that mean I've stopped loving her?" The question landed heavy between them. Danielle looked at the piano keys. Her reflection fractured across the glossy surface. "No," she whispered. "It just means you're still here." Silence. Then Grant leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "She was the only person who ever saw me before the money. We met in college. She was studying art. I was working 2 jobs just to pay tuition. We were nobodies. What changed? I sold my company." A bitter smile. "And she hated what it did to me. Said the world stopped being real when everything became a transaction. When she died, I told myself I'd earn enough to buy back the parts of me she loved." He laughed, dry and hollow. "Turns out some things can't be bought." Danielle's throat tightened. "And you think shutting everyone out honors her?" "I think letting someone else in betrays her," he said, eyes locked on hers. She didn't look away. "That's not loyalty, Grant. That's fear." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. He stood abruptly, pacing toward the window where the moonlight traced his profile in silver. "You think it's that simple? You don't know what it's like to lose." He stopped, catching himself. Danielle rose slowly. "To lose someone you'd give anything to save?" Her tone was quiet, but it cut through him like glass. He turned back, searching her face. "Who did you lose?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Her eyes glistened, the truth trembling on her lips before she finally let it out. "My son." The words were almost soundless, but they filled the room. Grant's expression changed, confusion first, then realization. "I had him when I was 19, she continued, voice unsteady. "His name was Isaiah. He was 3 when he got sick. I was working 2 jobs, no insurance, no help. By the time I got him to the hospital, it was too late." Her breath hitched. "I kept thinking, if I'd made more money, if I'd worked harder, maybe." She trailed off, shaking her head. "After that, I couldn't stand being around silence. So I started taking care of other people's kids, because loving them felt like remembering him." Grant didn't speak. He crossed the room and stopped just in front of her, the space between them heavy with grief, 2 different losses orbiting the same emptiness. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice rough. "I didn't know. You weren't supposed to." He reached out instinctively, his fingers brushing hers before she could pull away. The touch was brief, but it burned with understanding. "Danielle," his voice softened, fragile. "You walk around this house like you're carrying light in your hands. I didn't realize how much darkness you've had to survive." She smiled faintly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "That's the thing about light, Grant. You don't carry it. You earn it." He wanted to say more, to ask, to confess, to stay in that moment. But Nora's cry echoed down the hall, sharp and sudden. Danielle turned, instinct kicking in. Grant followed close behind. They found Nora sitting up in bed, eyes wide, breathing fast. "I dreamed you were both gone," she whispered. Danielle knelt beside her, holding her close. "We're right here, baby. We're not going anywhere." Grant sat on the edge of the bed, running a gentle hand over his daughter's hair. Their eyes met over her small head, a silent promise forming in the space between heartbeats. When Nora drifted back to sleep, Danielle stood to leave, but Grant's hand caught her wrist. Gentle, hesitant. "Thank you," he said, voice low, "for telling me." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the faint moonlight seeping through the curtains. "Thank you for listening." As she turned to go, he whispered the words almost to himself, but she heard them. "You make this house feel alive again." Danielle paused at the door, a soft ache in her chest. "Then maybe it's time you stopped living like a ghost." She disappeared down the hallway, leaving Grant staring after her, the echo of the piano still hanging in the air, and with it, the unshakable feeling that something inside him had finally begun to heal. The days that followed the storm felt different, lighter somehow, though no one said it aloud. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Whitmore estate, dust motes dancing in its glow like small, golden ghosts of the past set free. Nora was the first to notice. She woke earlier, laughed louder, and reached for Danielle's hand more often. The little girl who once clung to silence now hummed under her breath as she colored by the window. Danielle stood in the kitchen doorway that morning, watching her with quiet pride. Grant was there too, leaning against the marble counter, watching Danielle. He wasn't trying to hide it anymore. "You've done something I couldn't," he said softly, his voice laced with both wonder and guilt. Danielle turned, startled. "What do you mean?" "She laughs again," he said simply. "For months after her mother passed, I tried everything. Toys, trips, tutors. Nothing worked. Then you show up, and suddenly she's herself again." Danielle smiled, though the compliment stung with its own kind of ache. Children know when someone sees them. Nora doesn't need things, Grant. She needs connection. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. So do adults. The air shifted between them, soft, charged, filled with everything they didn't dare name. Danielle broke the silence first. "You want to help me with something today?" Grant raised an eyebrow. "Help you? You mean manual labor?" "Yes," she said with a teasing grin. "The garden's a mess after the storm. I thought Nora might enjoy planting something new." He pretended to groan. "You're going to make me ruin my shoes, aren't you?" "Probably," she said, and for the first time, he laughed, a real laugh that filled the kitchen like sunlight. By afternoon, they were all outside, sleeves rolled up, shoes kicked off. The Texas sun was bold but kind, warming the earth as they knelt in the soil. Nora chattered endlessly about which flowers were prettiest, and Danielle gently showed her how to dig small, careful holes. Grant, out of his element, fumbled with a trowel. "You're holding it like it's a golf club," Danielle said, unable to hide her laughter. He looked up, mock offense in his eyes. "I happen to be quite skilled at golf, thank you." "Yes, and that's why the dirt's on your tie, not in the ground." He looked down, and sure enough, she was right. A streak of mud crossed his shirt like a careless brushstroke. Nora giggled. "Daddy's losing to Miss Hayes." Danielle smirked. "I told you, I've been training for this my whole life." He grinned, then in one swift move, flicked a small handful of dirt toward her. It hit her arm. She gasped. "Grant Whitmore, did you just—" He smirked. "Consider it payback for the tie comment." She narrowed her eyes, scooped up a handful of soil, and threw it back. It hit his shoulder perfectly. Nora's laughter echoed across the yard, the kind of laughter that erases ghosts. When it was over, Grant's shirt was a disaster. Danielle's hair was full of stray petals, and Nora was declaring herself the winner of the garden war. They collapsed onto the grass, breathless and laughing. For a moment, the mansion didn't loom behind them. It was just three people, the warmth of the earth beneath them, and the kind of peace that comes only after remembering how to laugh again. Grant turned his head toward Danielle, his voice lower now. "I haven't heard that sound in years." "What sound?" "My own laughter." Danielle looked at him, her expression softening. Maybe it was waiting for the right reason. Their eyes met, and held, until Nora's voice broke the moment. "Miss Hayes, Daddy, look." She pointed toward the small patch of garden they'd planted together. 3 new blooms, pink, yellow, and white, swayed gently in the breeze. "See," Nora said proudly. "We made something new." Danielle smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. We did." Grant watched them, emotion tightening in his chest. In that moment, the estate didn't feel like a monument to loss anymore. It felt like the beginning of something fragile, alive. As the sun began to set, Danielle helped Nora wash the dirt off her hands at the garden sink. Grant stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching them with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and fear. Later, when Nora was asleep, Danielle walked back downstairs to put away the gardening tools. The house was quiet, filled with the scent of wet earth and lavender from the garden. Grant was in the living room, sitting by the fire even though the night was warm. He looked up when she entered. "I was going to offer to help," he said. "You'd just mess up the tools," she teased. "Probably," he admitted, smiling faintly. "But I'd still like to try." She hesitated, then sat across from him. The firelight flickered between them, painting his face in shades of amber and shadow. "You've changed since I got here," she said. "Have I?" "Yes. You're softer." He chuckled. "Softer isn't a word people usually use about me." "I don't mean weak," she said. "I mean human." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Maybe I just forgot how to be one." "Grief does that," she whispered. "It turns people into stone." He looked at her for a long time, something deep moving behind his eyes. "And what about you, Danielle? What turned you back?" She smiled sadly. "Children. They don't let you stay broken. They demand love, even when you think you have nothing left to give." He leaned forward slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "And you still have so much to give." Her breath caught. "You don't know that." "I do," he said. "Because I see it every day." The fire popped softly. Neither of them moved, caught in the quiet pull that had been building since the night of the storm. Then Nora's laughter echoed faintly from upstairs, a dream laugh, breaking the spell. Danielle stood quickly, smoothing her dress. "I should check on her." Grant nodded, his jaw tightening. "Of course." But as she walked away, her heart raced with something she couldn't name, something terrifyingly close to hope. And for the first time, Grant didn't look back at the piano or the shadows. He looked at the light disappearing up the stairs and realized he didn't want to be alone anymore. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains like a promise. The house smelled faintly of coffee and fresh bread, scents that hadn't belonged here for a long time. Danielle moved through the kitchen in a soft blue dress, her hair loosely tied back. She hummed to herself as she sliced fruit for Nora's breakfast. It was a tune Isaiah used to love, and though it still ached, it didn't hurt the way it used to. Grant stood in the doorway, unseen for a moment. He hadn't planned to stop. He just wanted to pass through on his way to a meeting. But then he saw her, and forgot where he was going. The sunlight touched her face, and for a fleeting second, the years of grief he carried felt lighter. She turned and caught him watching. "You're up early," she said, smiling. "I could say the same to you," he replied, walking in. "You always start the day singing?" "Only when the morning feels worth it." He smiled. "And today does?" She looked at him for a moment. "Yes, it does." He wanted to say something, anything, but Nora burst in wearing a pink tutu and fairy wings. "Miss Hayes, Daddy, look at me." Grant grinned. "You look magical." "I am magical," Nora said proudly. "Miss Hayes says when you plant flowers, you have to dance so they grow faster." Danielle laughed. "I may have exaggerated that part." Grant crossed his arms, feigning seriousness. "Well, I think we better test the theory, don't you?" Before she could protest, he turned on the small Bluetooth speaker by the counter. Soft music filled the kitchen, something playful and light. Nora twirled immediately, her wings brushing the air. Danielle hesitated, then joined her, laughing as Nora tugged her hand. Grant watched, smiling at the two of them. The way Danielle bent to match Nora's steps, the way their laughter harmonized like melody and harmony. Then Nora grabbed his hand. "Daddy, you too." "Oh no," he said quickly. "I don't dance before breakfast." "Yes, you do," Danielle teased. "You just forgot how." He raised an eyebrow. "You sound very sure about that." "I'm a nanny. It's in my job description, reminding people how to have fun." She reached for his hand before he could protest, pulling him into the circle. Nora squealed, and suddenly all three of them were spinning, laughing, the billionaire, the nanny, and the little girl who'd brought them together. When the song ended, they collapsed in laughter. Nora ran off to grab her wand, leaving Danielle and Grant breathless and close, closer than they'd ever been. Their laughter faded into something quieter. Danielle's hand was still in his. She started to pull away, but he didn't let go. For a moment, everything stilled. The hum of the refrigerator, the chirp of birds outside, all of it faded beneath the thrum of something neither of them wanted to name. "Danielle," he said softly, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. She looked up, heart racing. "Yes." He hesitated. "You've changed everything here. I thought I hired a nanny, but you," his voice faltered. "You brought my daughter back to life. You brought me back to life." Her breath caught. "Grant." He stepped a little closer, close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating off him. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd manage," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He shook his head slowly. "No, I wouldn't." Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Grant, don't." "Don't what?" he asked gently. "Don't make this harder than it already is." He frowned. What do you mean? She took a shaky breath. You're still healing. And I'm just trying to help you and Nora find your way again. That's all this is. His eyes searched hers. Is it? Danielle looked away. It has to be. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Grant's voice softened. Danielle, I'm not asking for promises. He stopped when Nora's voice came from down the hall. Daddy, Miss Hayes, come see. The flowers grew. They both exhaled, breaking the spell. Grant smiled faintly. Saved by the garden. Danielle smiled back, grateful for the interruption. Let's go. Outside, the three of them stood before the garden. The flowers they'd planted just days ago had bloomed faster than expected, full and bright, almost unreal against the Texas sun. Nora beamed. See? The dancing worked. Danielle laughed. Guess you were right, sweetheart. Grant looked at the flowers, then at Danielle. Maybe it did, he murmured. They spent the afternoon outside. Nora built tiny houses for ladybugs out of leaves while Grant and Danielle sat nearby, talking quietly. He told her stories about his early business failures, the ones no one knew. She told him about the small victories of her nannying days, the families she'd helped, the children she'd loved and left. At one point, he said, You must hate goodbyes. She looked at him, her voice soft. I've never learned how to make peace with them. Maybe some aren't meant to be final, he said. She smiled, but didn't answer. When the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold, Nora fell asleep on the grass, her head resting on Danielle's lap. Grant watched them. The woman who'd brought color back into his world, and the daughter who'd finally learned to smile again. Danielle brushed a strand of hair from Nora's face, her touch gentle. Grant's chest tightened. He stood, offering her his hand. Let me walk you in. She looked up at him, eyes warm, then nodded. She carefully lifted Nora and followed him inside. After settling the little girl in bed, they stood quietly in the hallway, the air thick with things unsaid. Danielle turned to leave, but Grant's voice stopped her. Stay for a moment. She hesitated, then nodded. They walked to the balcony overlooking the gardens, the night air cool against their skin. Below them, the flowers swayed in the moonlight, the same ones they'd planted together. Grant's voice was low, steady. You said something once. That light isn't something you carry, it's something you earn. She looked at him, surprised he remembered. You were right, he said. You've earned yours, Danielle. And somehow, you've shared it with both of us. Her eyes glistened. You make it sound like I'm some kind of miracle. He smiled faintly. You are. For a long, quiet moment, they simply stood there, not touching, not speaking, just breathing the same night air. Danielle finally whispered, Good night, Grant. He didn't answer at first. When he did, his voice was soft, reverent. Good night, Danielle. She turned to leave, her heart heavy and full all at once. As she disappeared down the hall, Grant looked back out at the moonlit garden and thought, maybe this was what healing really looked like. Not forgetting, not replacing, just beginning again. 3 days later, the Whitmore estate no longer felt like the same house. The laughter that used to echo in the halls had dimmed. Grant had been away since dawn, and Danielle couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something had shifted, something she couldn't yet name. She was setting the breakfast table when Nora ran in, clutching a drawing. Miss Hayes, look. I made you a family picture. Danielle knelt down. A family picture? Let me see. The little girl beamed as she unfolded it, crayon shapes and bright colors filling the page. There was a big house, a sun, and 3 stick figures holding hands. That's you, Nora said, pointing proudly. That's me, and that's Daddy. Danielle's breath caught. That's beautiful, sweetheart. Do you like it? I love it. Nora hugged her tightly. Then you have to stay forever. Danielle froze, holding the child who had slowly stolen her heart. Oh, Nora, she whispered, her voice soft but trembling. If only it were that simple. That evening, Grant returned home early. His face was hard to read, composed, but colder than she'd seen in weeks. Danielle noticed it the moment he walked in. Long day? She asked, trying to read him. You could say that. He placed his briefcase down and pulled off his tie. Where's Nora? Asleep. We read her favorite book twice tonight. She insisted on it. He nodded absently, then gestured toward the living room. We need to talk. Those words hit her stomach like a stone. She followed him quietly. The air between them had changed, heavier, unfamiliar. Grant turned, crossing his arms. Someone from the staff came to me this morning. She frowned. Okay. They said they saw you talking to a journalist by the gates yesterday. Is that true? Her heart stopped. What? No. I've never. They said the man was asking questions about my personal life, about my daughter. That you looked friendly. Grant. That's not. She took a step forward, panic rising. I went to pick up a package from the courier. The driver parked by the gate. That's all. He looked at her, expression unreadable. You're sure? Of course I'm sure. You think I'd ever? Her voice broke. After everything? He didn't answer. His silence stung more than accusation. Grant, she said softly. Please. Tell me you don't believe that. He looked away, jaw tight. I've learned not to take chances when it comes to my daughter. Her throat tightened. You think I'd hurt her? You think I'd sell your story for a paycheck? His voice rose, sharper than she'd ever heard. I've been burned before, Danielle. Everyone who's ever come close to this family has had a price. She stared at him, her heart breaking in slow motion. And you think mine is what, a headline? Grant ran a hand through his hair, exhaling hard. I don't want to believe it. But I have to protect Nora. Danielle stepped back, trembling. I thought you trusted me. I did, he said quietly. Maybe too much. The words cut deeper than any scream could have. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of the night air through the windows. She finally whispered, after all this time, after everything I've given, you still think I'm just like the rest of them? Danielle. No. She shook her head, her voice breaking. You told me I brought you back to life, Grant. You told me I made this house feel like home again. And now you look at me like I'm some stranger trying to destroy it. He closed his eyes, the guilt already forming behind them. I just need time to sort things out. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Then take your time. But don't expect me to stay where I'm not trusted. He opened his eyes, too late. She was already walking toward the door. Danielle, wait. She turned, tears streaking her cheeks. You said not all goodbyes were final. I think you were wrong. And with that, she walked out. Outside, the Texas night was warm, heavy with the smell of rain and dust. Danielle stood by her car, clutching the steering wheel, her hands trembling. She could barely breathe. Inside, Grant stood frozen in the living room, the echo of her voice still ringing in his ears. He hadn't meant to lose her, but his fear, the old wound of betrayal, had flared stronger than trust. He sat down heavily, his chest tight. Nora's drawing was still on the table beside him, 3 figures holding hands beneath a smiling sun. His hand shook as he picked it up. There, in bright crayon, was the world he'd almost believed he could have again. And now he'd broken it. The next morning, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Nora's laughter didn't echo from the garden. Danielle's humming was gone. Even the light through the windows felt colder. Nora came running down the stairs, her tiny voice bright. Miss Hayes. Breakfast. Grant froze. He hadn't found the words yet. How do you explain to a child that the person who made them feel safe is gone? He knelt. Sweetheart, he began carefully. Miss Hayes had to take some time off. Nora frowned. Why? She just needed to. Her bottom lip trembled. Did she stop loving us? Grant's heart broke completely. No, baby, he whispered. She didn't stop loving us. Then she whispered something that cut straight through him. Then why did you make her go? That night, Grant sat alone in his study, staring at the rain streaking down the windows. He hadn't called her. He hadn't apologized. Because the truth was, he didn't know how. He'd spent years building walls around his heart. Danielle had slipped past them without meaning to, and when she'd reached the part of him that still ached, he'd done what he always did. He pushed her away. And now, the silence left behind was unbearable. He picked up his phone. Her name was still there in his contacts. His thumb hovered over the screen for a long time, but he couldn't press call. Outside, thunder rolled over Lake Travis, and for the first time in years, Grant Whitmore, the man who had everything, felt utterly, completely lost. 2 days passed. The Whitmore mansion, once full of fragile warmth, now echoed with quiet regret. Danielle had moved into a small apartment on the east side of Austin, far from the lake and its painful memories. It was clean, modest, and temporary, a refuge, not a home. But home was where Nora's laughter had been. Every morning, she woke up to silence. No soft footsteps down the hallway, no small hands tugging at her sleeve. Just her and the sound of traffic through the blinds. She'd left a note for Nora when she left, something simple, something a child could understand. I'll always think of you when the flowers bloom, sweetheart. Be brave. Miss Hayes loves you. She tried not to imagine Nora reading it, but she did anyway. Every night. At work, she kept busy. She'd taken a temporary position at a daycare nearby. Routine, laughter, the noise of other children to keep her mind from wandering. But whenever she saw a child with curls like Nora's or heard a laugh that sounded too familiar, her chest tightened. The director, a kind woman named June, noticed. You okay, Danielle? You look a little far away today. Danielle forced a small smile. Just tired. June gave her a knowing look. Heart tired or body tired? Danielle hesitated, then whispered, both. Meanwhile, at the Whitmore estate, Grant was unraveling in his own quiet way. His meetings were shorter, his patience thinner, his nights sleepless. He'd stopped going into Nora's playroom. Too many reminders. The small cup Danielle used for bedtime tea still sat on the counter. He hadn't touched it. Nora had become distant too, quieter, withdrawn. When he asked if she wanted to play, she'd shake her head. When he tried to read her a story, she'd say softly, Miss Hayes does the voices better. He tried to explain, to reassure her, but it never landed. The more he spoke, the more she closed off. One night, Grant found her sitting on her bed, holding the crayon drawing she'd made. The one with the three of them. Sweetheart, he said gently. It's time for sleep. She looked up at him, eyes glossy. Did you make her leave because she's not mommy? His breath caught. No, baby. No, that's not why. Then why did she go? He swallowed hard. Because daddy made a mistake. She looked at him for a long moment, and then turned away, clutching the drawing to her chest. Grant sat on the edge of the bed after she fell asleep, guilt pressing on him like gravity. He thought of Danielle's face when she'd said those final words. You think I'm just like the rest of them. He'd spent years trying not to feel. And the one person who'd made him feel again, he'd driven her out. He pulled out his phone again, as he'd done every night. Her number waited there, patient, silent. His thumb hovered over the call button. Then, with a sigh that felt like defeat, he put the phone down again. The next afternoon, the weather broke. The Texas sky turned gray, and rain began to fall hard and fast, pelting the windows with steady rhythm. Grant stood by the balcony doors, staring out at the garden below, the garden Danielle had helped plant. The flowers bowed under the weight of the rain, their colors muted. Mr. Whitmore? The housekeeper, Mrs. Doyle, stood in the doorway. There's someone at the gate. Who is it? Reporter. Says he has questions about Miss Hayes. Something about a story. Grant's blood ran cold. Let him in. Minutes later, the man stood in the foyer, a lean figure with a cheap raincoat and a smirk that didn't fit the weather. Mr. Whitmore. Big fan of your company. I just wanted to confirm a few things before we publish. Grant's jaw clenched. Publish what? A story about your family, your daughter, your new nanny. Our source said there was tension. That you let her go because you found out she was. Grant cut him off. Your source lied. The man's smirk faltered. So you deny there was any? I don't deny anything, Grant snapped. But if you print a single word about her, I'll see you in court before your ink dries. The journalist stammered, backing away. Understood, sir. When the man left, Grant stood still for a long time, his pulse pounding. It hit him then. The story, the accusation, it was all smoke. None of it had been real. Danielle had told the truth. He'd thrown her trust away for nothing. That night, Grant drove through the rain. No plan, no destination, just the desperate need to find her. The windshield wipers thudded in rhythm with his heartbeat. He remembered her laugh, her patience with Nora, the way she'd looked at him that morning in the kitchen, sunlight and grace. He pulled into the daycare parking lot the next morning, soaked and exhausted. Through the rain-speckled glass doors, he saw her. Danielle was kneeling beside a little boy, helping him tie his shoes. Her hair was loose, her expression calm. She didn't see him at first. He stood there for a long time, just watching. The way she smiled gently when the boy got the knot right. The way she touched his shoulder, kind, patient, warm. It was everything he'd lost. When she finally turned and saw him, she froze. Their eyes met through the glass. For a moment, the whole world went quiet. Then she stood, straightening slowly, her expression unreadable. She opened the door. Rain spilled in around him, and for the first time, he couldn't find the words. Danielle, he said softly, his voice cracking. I was wrong. Her jaw tightened. You don't need to say it. I do, he insisted. I need to say it because I let my fear speak for me. I thought I was protecting Nora, but I was protecting myself from losing something I didn't think I deserved. Her eyes shimmered. And what was that? You, he said simply. You and her. The chance to be a family again. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain fell harder, a curtain between them. Danielle's voice was quiet. You broke something, Grant. I know. He stepped closer. But if there's even a chance I can fix it. She shook her head, stepping back. You can't fix trust with words. Not this time. Her voice didn't hold anger, just heartbreak. He nodded slowly, rain dripping from his hair. Then I'll earn it back. However long it takes. She looked at him for one long, shattering moment. Then, quietly, she said, you should go home. Nora needs you. Grant's throat closed. She needs you too. Danielle hesitated, her composure breaking for just a second. Then she turned away. Goodbye, Grant. He stood there in the rain, watching her walk back inside. For the first time in years, the billionaire who had everything realized what it meant to have nothing, not without her. That night, back at the estate, he stood again by the balcony, watching the rain fade into mist. Nora's laughter echoed faintly from the hallway, but his heart was heavy. In the garden below, the flowers Danielle had planted were rising again, droplets glittering on their petals. He whispered into the night, I'll make this right. The wind carried his words away, but he meant every one of them. Because some loves don't end when trust breaks. They begin again when truth finally surfaces. And Grant Whitmore was finally ready to fight for it. The rain stopped 2 days later. The sky over Lake Travis stretched wide and blue, as if the storm had rinsed everything clean except their hearts. Grant hadn't slept much. His apology to Danielle replayed in his mind like an unfinished sentence. She hadn't slammed the door in his face, but she hadn't opened it either. And maybe that was worse. He sat in the study, the morning light falling across old photographs. One of his late wife, smiling by the water, another of Nora as a baby. Between them, a small drawing taped to the corner of the frame, Nora's family picture. 3 stick figures, hand in hand. He traced the outline of the third figure with his thumb, the one labeled Miss Hayes. That night, he'd promised himself he'd earn back their trust. But he didn't know how. Across town, Danielle stood by her apartment window, looking out at the city below. The daycare had closed early, and the quiet pressed against her chest. She hadn't been herself since that morning, since he'd shown up in the rain, eyes full of regret. Her phone sat on the counter, silent. No calls, no texts. She deleted his number once, then saved it again. She didn't know which version of herself she believed in anymore. She poured a cup of tea and sat down at the kitchen table. Beside her lay a small bouquet of wildflowers, a gift from one of the kids at the daycare. Purple and yellow, a little uneven, but beautiful. She thought of Nora then, her laughter, her curiosity, the way she'd cling to Danielle's arm when she felt shy. The ache hit hard. Danielle whispered to the empty room, You deserve better than this, little one. Then she whispered something even softer. So do I. The next morning, Grant drove into the city. He hadn't planned it. He just went. He ended up at a flower shop. The same one where Danielle had once bought seeds for the garden. The woman behind the counter smiled. Something for a special occasion? He hesitated. Something for an apology. She nodded, choosing a mix of soft whites and pale yellows. Then you want honesty, not perfection. Tulips, maybe. They mean forgiveness. Grant smiled faintly. I'll take them. As he waited, he noticed a small card by the register. It read, Flowers can't fix what words broke, but they can open the door for new words to try. He slipped the card into his pocket. Danielle didn't expect him to show up again. When she opened her door and saw him standing there, suit wrinkled, tie gone, holding a bouquet, her breath caught. Grant, she said quietly, why are you here? He looked at her, really looked at her, like a man who hadn't seen daylight in days. I came because I realized something, he said. I was so busy trying to protect what I had left that I almost destroyed what I was meant to have next. She stayed silent, arms crossed, holding herself still. He stepped forward slightly. I know you don't owe me forgiveness, but I need you to know I'm not that man anymore. The one who leads with suspicion, who hides behind pride. I'm trying to be better. For Nora. For you. Danielle's throat tightened. Grant, I can't just forget. I'm not asking you to forget, he said softly. I'm asking you to let me show you I've learned. The wind lifted her hair gently as she stared at him. I was wrong about you, he continued. And I've spent every day since realizing that what you gave me, what you gave us, wasn't something I can ever repay. But I'll try. Every day, if you'll let me. She looked down at the flowers. Forgiveness tulips? He smiled faintly. That obvious? Her lips curved slightly. Maybe just a little. Then, after a long silence, she whispered, Do you know what hurt the most? He shook his head. It wasn't that you didn't trust me, she said quietly. It's that for 1 second, I believed you didn't see me. Not as who I am. Just as another story waiting to disappoint you. Grant's voice was low. You're the first person I've really seen in years, Danielle. I just didn't know how to look the right way. Her eyes softened, but her guard stayed up. And if I let you back in, what happens the next time you're scared? He swallowed hard. Then I'll come to you. Not push you away. Not hide behind the past. I'll talk. I'll listen. I'll choose us. Her heart stung at that last word, us. Just then, a small voice came from behind Grant. Miss Hayes. Danielle's eyes widened. Nora. The little girl peeked from around Grant's legs, clutching her stuffed bear. Daddy said I could come too. Danielle dropped to her knees instantly. Oh, sweetheart. Nora ran into her arms, hugging her tight. I missed you. Tears slipped down Danielle's cheeks as she held her. I missed you too, baby. So much. Nora pulled back, her eyes wide and hopeful. Can you come home now? Daddy said he was sorry. Grant stood frozen, emotion choking him. Danielle looked up at him. The man who'd once been unshakable, now standing there in quiet humility. I don't know if I'm ready, she said softly. Grant nodded. Then I'll wait. However long it takes. Nora looked between them, confused. Why are grown-ups so slow at loving people? That made Danielle laugh, the first real laugh since she'd left. Because, she said, brushing a tear away, sometimes grown-ups have to learn to be brave, too. Grant stepped closer, his voice low. Danielle, I'm done hiding from what scares me. I'm done living in a house that's perfect but empty. I want to build something real, something honest. Even if it takes time. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for the man she hoped was really there. Then she said quietly, I believe you. He exhaled, relief flickering across his features. Then maybe that's a start. Danielle nodded slowly, still holding Nora. A start. Grant knelt beside them. The three of them sat there. No promises, no grand gestures. Just truth, fragile but real, between them. The afternoon sun spilled through the open door, lighting the bouquet in Grant's hand. The tulips gleamed, yellow and white, imperfect, honest, alive. Sometimes, beginnings don't look like fireworks. They look like three people finally breathing in the same rhythm again. And for Grant Whitmore, that was everything. That night, Danielle couldn't sleep. The sound of Nora's laughter still echoed in her ears. It wasn't just the child's voice she missed. It was the feeling of home that had crept into her bones without permission. But home had always been a dangerous word for her. It meant roots, and roots meant loss. She sat by the window with a blanket around her shoulders, her tea growing cold. Outside, the street was quiet. The lamplight spilled across her worn wooden floor, and she let herself finally cry, not because she was hurt, but because something inside her was finally loosening. Grant's words kept replaying. I was so busy protecting what I had left that I almost destroyed what I was meant to have next. She hadn't wanted to believe him, but the look in his eyes, that naked sincerity, it wasn't the same man who had once accused her. Maybe people really could change. The next morning, Danielle drove out to the lake. She didn't plan it. Her hands just steered her there, as if her heart had decided before her mind could argue. The water shimmered in the distance, sunlight glinting off the ripples. The Whitmore estate stood tall and quiet, surrounded by its manicured gardens and iron fences. Her pulse quickened as she parked near the back gate, the one Nora loved to sneak through when she wanted to chase butterflies. She walked up the gravel path, past the hydrangeas, past the stone bench where she and Nora once read Goodnight Moon. It all looked the same, but different, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Grant was by the garden when she found him, his sleeves rolled up, hands in the soil. He didn't hear her approach at first. When he finally looked up, the surprise on his face turned to quiet awe. Danielle. She nodded slightly. You plant now? He smiled faintly. Trying. Figured I should learn something from the woman who kept this place alive. She took a step closer. Tulips again? Roses, he said softly. Nora said they were your favorite. Danielle knelt down beside him, brushing her fingers over the petals. She remembers everything. Grant looked at her, the sunlight catching his tired eyes. So do I. Silence fell between them, but it wasn't sharp this time. It was soft, like something waiting to bloom. He finally spoke. You didn't have to come back. I know, she said. But I didn't want Nora to think love was something you give up on when it gets hard. His throat tightened. You always see the bigger picture. She smiled a little. That's what nannies do. He laughed quietly, a low, broken sound that felt more like gratitude than amusement. You know, before you came here, I thought I understood how to build things. I could fix anything with money, strategy, force. But this, he gestured between them. This doesn't work that way, does it? No, she said softly. You can't buy trust, Grant. You earn it. One honest day at a time. He nodded. Then I'll earn it. However long it takes. For the first time, she didn't doubt him. Later, they sat on the back porch watching Nora play near the swing set, her laughter spilling through the warm air. Danielle sipped lemonade while Grant sat beside her, elbows on his knees, quiet but content. You ever think about what's next? She asked after a long silence. He turned to her. Every day. And I don't know yet, he admitted. But whatever it is, I know I don't want to live it scared anymore. She studied him, the way his jaw softened when he looked at Nora, the peace settling around him like a long overdue exhale. Fear can make good people do foolish things, she said. He nodded. And forgiveness can make broken people whole again. Danielle looked down, blinking away the tears she hadn't expected. You really mean that? Grant turned fully toward her, voice steady. I mean every word. I meant it the night I knocked on your door, and I'll mean it for the rest of my life. Nora ran up then, her hair wild, her grin infectious. Daddy, Miss Hayes, come push me. Danielle looked at him, uncertain, almost shy. He smiled softly. You heard the boss. They followed Nora to the swing. Danielle stood behind her, giving gentle pushes, while Grant stood in front, catching her laughter like it was sunlight. Nora squealed, kicking her feet higher. Don't let go. Danielle laughed. Never. Grant caught her eyes then, and something passed between them. A silent promise. They had both been holding on too tightly to the wrong things. The past, fear, control. But now, they were learning to hold on to what mattered, each other. That evening, after Nora fell asleep, Grant walked Danielle to her car. The crickets sang around them. The lake glimmered in the moonlight. He reached out, hesitating just slightly, before taking her hand. I know I don't deserve a second chance, Danielle, but I'm asking for one anyway. Not because I expect it, but because I hope I've finally learned how to protect something without destroying it. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not the billionaire, not the man who once doubted her, but someone stripped down to his truest self. I don't know what the future looks like, Grant, she said. But I know this. If we do this, it has to be honest. No pretending, no pride, no fear. He nodded slowly. Then that's how we'll start. Honest. She squeezed his hand gently. Okay. It was one word, but it carried everything. He smiled, relief flooding his face. Okay. As she drove away that night, Danielle glanced in the rearview mirror. The Whitmore estate faded into the darkness behind her, but the warmth stayed. Sometimes, love isn't a grand declaration. It's a quiet return. She rolled down her window, the Texas air washing over her, and smiled. She didn't know where the road would lead, but for the first time in years, it felt like she was heading home. What would you have done in Danielle's place? Walk away to protect your peace, or return to rebuild what was once broken? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. 6 months later, spring had settled deep into the heart of Texas. The Whitmore estate no longer felt like a museum. It breathed. The garden was alive again, full of color, laughter, and the hum of bees. Danielle knelt beside the tulip bed with Nora, helping her pat down the soil around the new seedlings. The little girl wore her favorite sun hat, the one Danielle had sewn tiny yellow stars onto. Nora squinted up at her. Do flowers get scared? Danielle smiled. Maybe a little, when the wind's too strong. What do they do then? They bend, Danielle said softly. But they don't break. Nora nodded like it was the most important thing she'd ever learned. Behind them, Grant stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, watching. He'd traded his suits for jeans and rolled-up sleeves these days, more comfortable in the dirt than at any boardroom table. He wasn't the same man the world called the Iron Executive. He laughed more easily now, slept better, smiled without checking if anyone was watching. But when his eyes found Danielle, there was still that look, the same one from the first night he'd realized he might lose her, a mix of awe, fear, and something sacred. He walked down the steps, stopping by the garden. You two planning to take over my yard completely? Nora giggled. We already did, Daddy. Danielle looked up at him, smirking. You started it. These are your forgiveness tulips. He chuckled, crouching beside them. Guess we should plant more, then. Nora pointed to a patch of soil. Right there. Grant nodded solemnly. Right there, boss. They planted together, the three of them, in the quiet hum of the afternoon. And for the first time in a long time, Grant realized he didn't feel haunted anymore. The shadows of his late wife had softened into memory, not pain. The guilt that once kept him locked inside himself had loosened its hold. This simple, messy, honest moment felt like grace. Later that evening, after Nora had gone to bed, Danielle found Grant sitting by the lake with a notebook in his lap. She walked over quietly. Working. He shook his head. Writing. About. He smiled faintly. About us. She raised a brow. Us. He nodded, turning the notebook so she could see. Inside, written in his neat, deliberate handwriting, were a few lines. Sometimes the heart doesn't heal by forgetting. It heals by finding something new to beat for. Danielle read it twice, her chest tightening. You've been writing? He shrugged, a little shy now. Guess you rubbed off on me. She laughed softly. I didn't know billionaires kept journals. He met her eyes. This one does. Especially when he's terrified of losing what he loves. Danielle sat beside him, folding her legs. The water reflected the moonlight, rippling softly. You're not going to lose me, Grant, she said quietly. Not if you keep showing up like this. He turned to her fully then, voice barely above a whisper. You still make me nervous. She smiled, eyes glinting. Good. Means it's real. He laughed softly, then looked back at the lake. You know, I used to think love was something you earned with effort, or power, or reputation. But it turns out it's just showing up, even when it's uncomfortable. That's all any of us ever want, Danielle said. Someone who stays. The night hummed around them. A frog croaked somewhere near the water. Fireflies blinked between the reeds. Grant reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. After a moment, he whispered, Danielle? Yeah. Thank you. For what? For seeing me. Even when I didn't deserve it. Her eyes softened. You made yourself worth seeing. He smiled, slow, genuine, a little broken still but full of peace. Then, leaning in, he kissed her. It wasn't a desperate kiss, not like before. It was steady, certain, the kind that says I'm home now. The following week, Nora's laughter filled the house as she chased her puppy down the hallway. Grant was making breakfast, pancakes, his specialty since Danielle had taught him the recipe. Danielle entered the kitchen, tying her apron. You're actually using the right amount of flour this time? He gave her a mock glare. I'll have you know, I'm improving. Nora giggled. Miss Hayes is better. Traitor, Grant said, laughing. Danielle slid beside him, reaching for a bowl. Their hands brushed, brief, warm, familiar. It was domestic, simple, and yet sacred in its ordinariness. She glanced up at him. You realize you're happy, right? He looked around. The messy kitchen, the giggling child, the faint smell of batter burning, and nodded. I know. For the first time in years, he truly did. That afternoon, they all went out to the porch again. The wind off the lake was soft, the sunlight golden. Nora sat on the steps coloring while Grant and Danielle rocked slowly in the swing. He turned to her after a while. You ever think about what comes next? She smiled. No rush to find out. Good, he said, slipping his arm behind her shoulders. I like now. So do I. Nora looked up then, holding her drawing high. Look, it's us. She'd drawn 3 stick figures again. This time, a fourth beside them. A small dog, tongue out, tail wagging. Grant laughed. Guess we've grown. Danielle studied the picture. Looks like a family. Nora grinned. That's because we are. Grant looked at Danielle. You hear that? Danielle met his eyes, and for once, didn't look away. I do. The sun dipped low over the lake, bathing everything in gold. The tulips swayed gently in the breeze, a living reminder that things, even broken things, could bloom again with enough patience and love. Grant looked at Danielle, his voice low. You ever think about how it started? The biting, the crying, the chaos. She laughed, shaking her head. And now look at her, sweet as pie. He smiled. Guess she just needed the right person to show her how to trust. Danielle glanced at him. Guess you did too. He nodded, a soft smile curving his lips. Yeah, I did. They sat there as the evening wrapped around them. No past hanging over them. No fear of what came next. Just peace. And somewhere deep inside, Grant thought of his late wife. Not with sorrow, but gratitude. Because her love had built the man he used to be, and Danielle's love was helping him become the man he was meant to be. Love, he realized, didn't replace what was lost. It redeemed it. As the last light faded, Nora called out from the porch. Daddy, Miss Hayes, come inside. It's story time. Grant stood, offering Danielle his hand. Shall we? She took it, smiling. Always. They walked inside together, the sound of Nora's laughter leading them home. The house that once echoed with silence was alive again, filled with warmth, forgiveness, and a love that had taken its time to grow roots deep enough to last forever. And as the door closed softly behind them, the tulips swayed in the Texas night, blooming where heartbreak once lived. Would you have given Grant another chance after what he did, or walked away for good? Tell me what you think in the comments below. As the lights from the Whitmore estate glimmered softly against the Texas night, a calm silence fell, not empty, but full of second chances, full of the courage it takes to love again after being broken. Because in the end, this wasn't a story about a billionaire or a nanny. It was a story about what happens when people choose to see each other, not for who they were, but for who they're still trying to become. Grant learned that power can build walls, but only humility can open doors. Danielle discovered that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means freeing yourself enough to feel joy again. And little Nora, she taught them both that love, when given freely, heals things logic never could. The moral? Love doesn't always arrive the way we expect. Sometimes it shows up looking like work, patience, and one quiet moment of choosing to stay. Because the truth is, the strongest kind of love isn't born in perfection. It's born in the wreckage, when two people look at each other and still whisper, let's try again. So tonight, as you sit with their story, ask yourself this. If love knocked again, after betrayal, after heartbreak, after years of guarding your heart, would you have the courage to open the door? That's the question Grant and Danielle had to answer. And maybe, it's the one we all will, one day. If this story touched your heart, drop a love in the comments and tell us. Would you choose to forgive and rebuild, or protect your peace and walk away? Your words might just help someone out there choose healing, too. And if you believe love deserves a second chance, hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs hope tonight, and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us all what the heart is truly capable of.